Welcome to Xi Jinping Briefing. The content of the briefing includes: Golden Week loses its shine as China's economy wobbles. We are waiting, family of an Israeli hostage marks her birthday. Trump recenters the violence in Israel on himself. China's ties with America are warming, a bit. Mr. Xi bumps up the share prices of firms he visits. Golden Week loses its shine as China's economy wobbles. The Sydney Morning Herald. China's Golden Week holiday, which usually sees a surge in domestic tourism and consumer spending, was lackluster this year. Box office sales were down 39% from 2019 levels, the number of travelers using Alipay was 20% lower, and average daily home sales were down 17%. This is concerning as 80% of China's household wealth is tied up in property, and falling property prices could lead to a decrease in consumer spending and a ripple effect in the economy. In response, Chinese policymakers are considering issuing at least 1 trillion Chinese yuan, $213 billion, for infrastructure spending. We are waiting, family of an Israeli hostage marks her birthday. New York Times. Noa Argamani and her boyfriend Avinatan were kidnapped by Hamas assailants during a music festival in Israel near the Gaza border. It is estimated that 260 people died in the Hamas assault. Noah's mother, Leora Argamani, who is battling brain cancer, made an appeal to China's top leader, Xi Jinping, for help in freeing her daughter. China has come under pressure from the US and Europe for not condemning the violent attacks by Hamas. Trump recenters the violence in Israel on himself. Washington Post. Former US President Donald Trump has accused Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of letting down the US during the 2020 assassination of Iranian military leader Qasem Soleimani. During a campaign speech in Florida, Trump expressed his disappointment in Israel and Netanyahu for not taking a more active role in the attack. Trump's criticism follows reports that Israel played a role in tracking Soleimani's cell phone, allowing him to be located and killed by a U.S. airstrike in Iraq. The ex-president's comments may also have been influenced by Netanyahu's early congratulations to President Joe Biden after the 2020 election, which Trump viewed as a terrible mistake. At the same event, Trump praised Hezbollah, the Iranian-backed militant group linked to Soleimani, describing them as very smart. He also claimed that recent terrorist attacks in the U.S. were comparable to the violence in Israel, suggesting that immigrants crossing the U.S.-Mexico border posed similar threats to armed militants. China's ties with America are warming, a bit. Economist. Chuck Schumer, the majority leader of America's Senate, held meetings with Chinese Communist Party leaders during his visit to China. Schumer openly discussed various contentious issues, including trade competition, the conflict between Israel and Hamas, unfair Chinese trade practices, and China's support for Russia's actions in Ukraine. While Schumer was direct and blunt in his remarks, his Chinese hosts responded pragmatically, with the foreign ministry toughening its line on Hamas and condemning acts that harm civilians. China's response is driven by its need for foreign investment and know-how and its desire to avoid tighter American-led controls on exports of technologies. China also recognizes the importance of diplomatic clout and the need to lower tensions with the United States. Although there is a bipartisan consensus in the U.S. that China is a significant challenge, divisions exist in terms of how to compete with China. There are concerns about isolationism and the lack of focus on competing with China for top jobs and influence at the UN. Additionally, there is a lack of agreement on how to respond to the situation in Taiwan, with some fearing that causing China to lose all hope could trigger a war. Mr. Xi bumps up the share prices of firms he visits. Economist. A study by researchers in Japan has found that visits by Chinese President Xi Jinping and his predecessors to listed companies on the Shanghai and Shenzhen stock exchanges led to an increase in abnormal returns on investments in the visited firms. The researchers suggested that the impact was due to the visits being seen as a sign that the government would provide additional support to those companies. The effect on company value was found to be greater than that observed when U.S. company bosses met White House officials. Taiwan is closely watching the Hamas-Israel war for lessons as it faces intimidation from China. Associated Press. Taiwan is closely watching the conflict between Israel and Hamas in order to learn lessons about how to handle threats from China. Taiwan's defense minister has said that the war between Hamas and Israel blew up so suddenly, prompting Taiwan to improve its ability to forecast possible threats. China has been conducting military drills near Taiwan as tensions between the two countries have grown. Taiwan has rejected China's demands to accept Communist Party rule and maintains close ties with the U.S. Taiwan has expressed its support for Israel in the face of the Hamas attack and has urged its citizens to avoid traveling to Israel. The conflict in Ukraine has also raised concerns that China may act against Taiwan. Australian father's life in danger and should be Albanese's top priority, friends say. The Sydney Morning Herald. Friends and supporters of detained Australian writer Yang Hengjuan are calling for his release to be the top priority during Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's visit to Beijing. Yang has spent over 4 years in detention on charges of espionage, which he denies. Concerns are growing over his declining health as he battles an untreated cyst on his kidney. Yang's supporters had hoped for a deal that would secure the release of both Yang and Cheng Lei, a journalist who was recently released from a Chinese prison. However, they fear that Yang will now be used as a political weapon by Beijing. China-India border talks, dispute to be resolved as soon as possible. South China Morning Post. Chinese and Indian military officials have committed to resolving their border dispute as soon as possible, according to China's defense ministry. The 20th round of commander-level talks took place near the disputed Himalayan territory, and the two sides engaged in active, in-depth and constructive communication to find a mutually acceptable resolution. While the line of actual control, LAC, has been relatively calm since a violent clash in June that resulted in the deaths of Indian and Chinese soldiers, diplomatic tensions between the two countries have persisted. The commitment to resolve the dispute comes amid rising tensions between the nuclear-armed neighbors. The one big reason why China can't be a bystander in the Middle East. The Sydney Morning Herald. China's reliance on oil imports from the Middle East poses a significant risk to its energy security, especially as tensions escalate in the region. China's oil imports from Saudi Arabia, the second-largest producer in the world, account for half of its total oil imports, while over a third of all oil burned in China comes from the Persian Gulf. China has also been increasing its imports of Iranian oil, with purchases tripling in the past 2 years and China buying 87% of Iran's oil exports last month. Oil is crucial to China's energy needs as the country depends on imports for 72% of its oil consumption. China has made substantial investments in electric vehicles, but petrol consumption remains high due to new car sales and increased driving. China is also the world's leading producer of petrochemicals, which are made from oil and natural gas. China's reliance on oil imports is unlikely to decrease significantly in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Six, your favorite observer from the 6 Degrees world. Today, we have an interesting mix of news to discuss, ranging from China's Golden Week holiday to international relations and conflicts. So, let's dive in. First up, China's Golden Week holiday didn't shine as bright this year. Box office sales were down, the number of travelers using Alipay was lower, and average daily home sales took a dip. This is a concern because property makes up a significant portion of China's household wealth, and falling property prices could have a ripple effect on the economy. To counter this, Chinese policymakers are considering infrastructure spending. Looks like they're trying to give Golden Week its shine back. Moving on, we have the heart-wrenching story of Noah Argamani, an Israeli hostage, and her family's plea for help. Noah and her boyfriend were kidnapped by Hamas assailants, and her mother, who is battling brain cancer, appealed to China's top leader, Xi Jinping, for assistance. China has faced pressure from the US and Europe for not condemning the violent attacks by Hamas. Let's hope there's a positive outcome for Noah and her family. Now, let's talk about former US President Donald Trump, who seems to have recentered the violence in Israel on himself. He criticized Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for not being more involved in the 2020 assassination of Iranian military leader Qasem Soleimani. Trump's comments may have been influenced by Netanyahu's early congratulations to President Joe Biden, which he saw as a terrible mistake. Oh, Trump always finding a way to make it about himself. Next, we have a bit of a surprise. Chuck Schumer, the majority leader of America's Senate, had meetings with Chinese Communist Party leaders during his visit to China. They openly discussed contentious issues, and China responded pragmatically to avoid tensions and secure foreign investment. Looks like there's a bit of a warm-up in China-US relations, but there's still a long way to go. In a fascinating study, researchers in Japan found that visits by Chinese President Xi Jinping to listed companies led to an increase in abnormal returns on investments. It seems like the visits were seen as a sign that the government would provide additional support. Talk about a presidential power move. Shifting our focus to Taiwan, they're closely watching the conflict between Israel and Hamas to learn how to handle threats from China. Taiwan has been facing military drills and demands from China to accept Communist Party rule. They've expressed support for Israel and urged citizens to avoid traveling there. The conflict in Ukraine has also raised concerns about China's actions towards Taiwan. Looks like Taiwan is taking notes and preparing for any potential threats. Now, let's talk about the detained Australian writer Yang Hengjuan. Friends and supporters are calling for his release to be the top priority during Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's visit to Beijing. Yang has been in detention for over 4 years on espionage charges, and there are growing concerns about his declining health. His supporters had hoped for a deal that would secure his release, but there are fears that he may be used as a political weapon. Let's hope things work out for Yang and his loved ones. On the China-India front, military officials from both countries have committed to resolving their border dispute as soon as possible. While the line of actual control has been relatively calm, diplomatic tensions have persisted. It's good to see both sides actively working on finding a resolution. Let's hope for a peaceful outcome. Lastly, we have China's dependence on oil imports from the Middle East. China's energy security is at risk as tensions escalate in the region. With a significant portion of its oil imports coming from Saudi Arabia and an increasing reliance on Iranian oil, China's oil consumption remains high. Despite investments in electric vehicles, petrol consumption is still on the rise. Looks like China will continue to rely on oil imports for the foreseeable future. And that's a wrap, folks. We've covered a range of topics today, from China's economy to international affairs. Now, I turn the floor to you, my dear viewers. What are your thoughts on these news stories? Do you have any burning questions for me? Let's hear what's on your mind. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.